Hello, welcome back to our Object Relations lecture series. I've enjoyed sharing many topics with you about my object relations thinking, which relates to also my writing and teaching. And in these brief YouTube videos, I can share little snapshots of my thinking about all very individual, very important, different topics. Today, I'm going to be speaking about the difference between cravings and yearnings. We all have both. We all have cravings that are more related to the oral dynamics of our psyches, and we all have yearnings that relate to our heart area. In fact, when I do my monthly 4-hour psychotherapy group, which is online, I always start with a meditative psychic visualization, one that I guide people through. And as people allow whoever comes up from the internal world to come and then they speak to them in their mind, I also go, and we do this with a second person. Ultimately, each person shares a visualization and we have a group evolve from that every time. And it's an ongoing bonding group. But I focus in on the psychic visualization. I focus on the difference between speaking from one's stomach and speaking from one's heart. And when we speak from the stomach, we're dealing with this area of what I call cravings. And we're dealing with hunger, anger, hate, rage, all these things connected with primal kinds of hunger and also ambition. And it's different. It's very different than an area of desire and yearning that we feel in our hearts. So the area of cravings brings up a lot of gut reactions in when we're speaking to whoever we're speaking to in our mind from our stomach. It can bring up hostility, and it can bring up hungry cravings just to connect with the other. And this comes through focusing in a meditative way on our stomach and letting our gut speak. We speak from our cravings. And then when I guide people into the heart area, it's quite different. I say, speak to this person through your heart if you can feel a connection with them in your heart area. If not, breathe into that area. But if you can feel the connection as you're speaking to this person in your mind, this is the area of longings, yearnings, love, loving desire, and also of loss and grief. Because whenever we deal with yearnings, we're dealing with yearnings to love and, of course, to be loved. And in yearning to love, we also experience grief and loss for those we've lost, that we've loved. So in my monthly 4-hour therapy group, we have a half-hour break for lunch, but it's 4 hours overall. We have this very important way for people to communicate with each other through sharing their visualizations that touch on the stomach area and the heart area. And people bond deeply through this because they share the most intimate expressions to the people inside of them who arise from their inner world to then speak to the people in the group in the what we call a transitional world, from the outer world out there and from the inner world inside of us to a transitional world where we speak to people in a therapeutic holding environment like the group process. And these groups therefore facilitate the very natural, organic process of mourning and grief. and slowing down to feel feelings of sadness, as well as feelings of anger and rage and hurt that come with loving another. But we get to yearning for love and we get to loss of love. And when we evolve through what I call the developmental mourning process, then we mourn again and again in the most natural way when we focus on the people we've lost in love. And it doesn't have to be lost through death and requiring bereavement mourning. It can be just loss through separation, getting out of contact with someone, or having disappointments with someone we're still involved with in a relationship. All of that brings grief and loss. And so allowing feelings of sadness requires slowing down. And it also requires having more love than hate within us. So when we go from the stomach area where we express anger and resentment as well as hunger, and we go to the heart area, by expressing some of the anger, we open up the possibilities of having more love towards the object felt in the moment than hate. And therefore, we bypass some of the more angry side of our ambivalence towards those we love and get to deeper stages of love and mourning. And that allows us to surrender to sadness and to embrace a person through memory and to feel sadness that way. And this opens our capacity to love and create. I follow somewhat in a tradition of Melanie Klein's thinking in terms of the creative process, because Melanie Klein, like myself, I understand that we come to open up objects within us, an internal object experience and fantasy experience. We also open up creative process and love process. And even though interpersonal relations are very different than the creative work we do, our capacity to create and to love come from a similar place of surrendering to this capacity to have more love than hate in the moment, in the creative process moment, in the intimacy moment with love. We come from the inside. That's what love and creativity are all about. They're also about spontaneity, but spontaneity requires surrender, and surrender also means slowing down. And this is hard in the world we live in, to slow down. It gets more and more difficult, and the busier we get, the more difficult. But this is why in the therapeutic moment in my group monthly, and in individual therapy sessions, or in my writing group, or in my supervision group, we slow down to a therapeutic environment. We slow down within a therapeutic environment that allows and facilitates the slowing down, to listen to what's inside, the inner voices in us, to listen to the voice we want to say that's uniquely our own from within. And this involves sustaining internal love relationships, and that requires also letting go of those that we've ended, or feeling disappointment and opening to love again. And so we develop a capacity to have anger towards those we love and stay in relationships. We also develop a capacity to separate from those we want to leave and to allow the goodbyes. And that's part of my visualization process in the monthly group as well. It's a monthly Saturday group that I've done for over 25 years. And people bond deeply and connect to each other as they connect to those within. But letting go and feeling sadness, feeling grief affect, which is feelings of sadness, is a very important part of loving. No one can love without loss. There was once a popular book called Necessary Losses, losses throughout life are necessary to be able to love, to be able to create, at least artistic forms of creativity that come from within. And this is why I focus so deeply on the stomach area and the heart area and the differentiation between them, and then moving from anger and hate into love and connection again, and into the creative possibilities that that brings. I want to say something also about eating disorders in relation to this, because I'm talking about cravings in terms of our oral instincts, as opposed to the heart loving affects. We have instinctual oral instincts that I relate to those gut expressions from the stomach in emotional terms. And I want to say that when sitting with someone with a pretty severe anorexic condition, I could feel her loneliness in my oral cavity. I use my body always, along with my feelings, I use my body and sensation to understand my patients as I'm sitting in the room with them, or whether they're on the screen or a phone or in the room. When I'm with them, I use my body sensations as well as my feelings to understand what's going on in their internal world and what is preventing them from opening up and surrendering and expressing their full true selves. In the way of that, what defensive, what blocks. And it was very interesting to me when sitting with this very unique, very profound woman who had happened to have an anorexic condition, that I could feel her longings, her yearnings in the oral cavity. So actually, I was feeling some kind of symbiotic combination of craving and yearning. Oral cavity, where we usually feel cravings and for hunger, for food and emotional food. But in the oral cavity, so it was like the yearnings of the heart were located, at least at that time that I was with her in that moment, were located in the oral cavity. I think I sensed what was going on in her oral sphere, in my own. And I could feel a very poignant, I would say really profound, because so uniquely different than usual, sense of wanting another and feeling loneliness and loss just right there in my oral cavity. So I think all the eating disorders convert emotional experience into dynamics of their oral cavities, whether someone's overeating, whether someone's a bulimic, where they're taking in some kind of bad experience that reminds them of an internal bad mother, and then wanting to vomit up, and taking in a good mother, and then it turns bad because you can't digest it, it's too much. Then you want to spit it out, and then it becomes like a bulimic expression, from gorging to puking, from taking in to expressing out, like we talk about anal taking in and expulsion, or take about anal retention or anal evacuation, but we can also talk about in the oral place in us, taking in and if we can't digest psychic food, just like if we can't digest physical food, we'll want to vomit. And people who are bulimic do that. They take in what they hope will be a good experience. And when they get poisoned inside by negative associations with the other, they will want to vomit them up. And that's where they get into that bulimic cycle. So it's in the oral sphere that we're dealing with the object relations of love, desire, and rejection of ourselves, leading to our rejecting the other through this experience of the oral vomiting. But in the woman who is anorexic, Anorexia is a very isolating condition, and the woman, who could be very social, had a deep, deep early sense of aloneness. And I felt that in my oral cavity when sitting with her, and I knew this was her profound, most deepest sense of aloneness. And this woman was able to move on from there into internalizing others in a better way inside through the therapy process, and then has that carried on in life. She was able to internalize others. So that created more of the capacity to love and to create, and she became fuller inside. But I was struck by that moment where I felt aloneness in my oral cavity, because for myself as a separate person, I don't experience any of my own aloneness in an oral way. Only by my communing with my patient, which I do through my body and mind fully, do I sense that aloneness being in the oral area. And it helped me understand the depth of early isolated aloneness in this patient. So thank you very much for joining me today for this whole new topic on cravings versus yearnings. I hope you'll play with these ideas and perhaps use them in meaningful ways for your life and for your clinical work if you are a clinician. Thank you very much. These are also issues we address in my supervision groups, where I do role plays and their experiential groups. Thank you very much for joining me on Cravings and Yearnings.